So I'm gonna, of course, start with introductions for the documentary's fantastic director and producer, Erika Cohn, as well as producer Angela Tucker. We also have two, I hate to use the term film subject because that seems like such a microscope term, but they are documented in the documentary. Cynthia Chandler, who is the co-founder and executive director of Justice Now. Hello, Cynthia. As well as Kelli Dillon, who is an advocate for violence prevention. To kick things off with, Erika and Angela, can you talk about how you came to this story and how that translated into wanting to document it in the finished product?
Sure. Thank you all so much for having us tonight. I wish we could be at the IDA screening series in person. It's such a special screening series. So appreciate being able to share this digital space. So Cynthia and I were first introduced in 2010 through a mutual friend. And I was really inspired by Justice Now's Let Our Families Have a Future campaign, which essentially exposed the multiple ways that prisons destroy the basic fundamental human right to family. One of the most heinous, of course, being the illegal sterilizations primarily targeting women of color, which really screamed eugenics to me. As a Jewish woman who grew up in Salt Lake City, the phrase never again was always in the back of my mind. And when I learned about this different kind of genocide that was happening through imprisonment, through forced sterilizations behind bars, I knew that I wanted to get involved. And initially, that was as a volunteer legal advocate. Cynthia invited me into the organization, and from there I provided direct service needs for over 150 people inside California's women's prisons. And together we began collaborating on a project that ultimately would become Belly of the Beast. And in the beginning stages, the idea was really to chronicle the incredible human rights documentation process that was going on inside prison, that was funneled out through this amazing underground network of activists through allied organizations like Justice Now. And that all changed when I met Kelli. I had heard about Kelli's incredible activism through my work at Justice Now, but didn't actually have a chance to meet her until a couple of years into the process. And at the point that we met, Kelli was working as a community interventionist doing gang intervention and domestic violence prevention work, and wasn't at that point in her life interested in talking about the sterilization abuse, but wanted to get involved kind of behind the scenes as an advisor. So very early on, Kelli was a tremendous resource in kind of advising the process of documenting these human rights abuses. And then again, that all changed in 2013 when the Center for Investigative Reporting released their incredible reporting. And there was this tremendous momentum, a national conversation, a series of hearings, potential legislation. And that was the moment that Kelli was really almost called back into the movement and asked to testify on behalf of so many other people who couldn't. And that was also the moment that Kelli and I decided that we would start filming a little bit. And from there, it became very, very clear that the film really needed to center around her story and her relationship with Cynthia. And as you see in the film, if it wasn't for Kelli, none of this would have happened to begin with. If it wasn't for Kelli's initial discovery and also advocating for others, there wouldn't be a film, there wouldn't be the investigation that Justice Now did, the series of reporting. There wouldn't be a bill. None of this would have happened.
I came on the project about, I guess now 4 years ago, and Erika had been, filming for a long time and had kind of these long relationships with everyone on the project. We met at a film festival. She showed me some footage, and really I saw a part of Kelli's interview, and that's when I knew I had to be a part of the film. As a Black woman, I had heard about forced sterilizations happening, particularly Fannie Lou Hamer is an example of someone who in 1965 had been forcibly sterilized by a doctor, and they were happening so often in Mississippi. They were calling them the Mississippi appendectomy. So that's kind of one example of the history behind that I had known about and always thought someone should make a film about this. And then I saw, Erika's footage and knew that I had to be a part of it. So that's when I joined the project as a producer.
This next question is for whoever wants to answer. For me as a disabled woman, the concept of forced sterilization is a nightmare. It's a very real fear that I've always heard about. And when we watch in the documentary, there is a horrifying moment where you're showing the social media responses of people who believe this is acceptable. Why is it in 2020, as we talk about how progressive, quote unquote, that we've become, that there is still a large subset of people that believe that this is acceptable. This is an acceptable thing to do.
I think, and this is just, my opinion, that we haven't dealt with the root issues underneath this kind of sterilization abuse and eugenics. And that's why it keeps popping up. And, white supremacy, ableism, misogyny are at the root of our culture in our society. They were omnipresent at the founding of this country, and they haven't gone away. And they affect all of our institutions, including our family structures and who has the right to have or not have children. And we haven't dealt with this. And in fact, we've rendered it so invisible in a way, because the communities targeted for sterilization are also vulnerable and rendered invisible frequently, that people don't even know what the word eugenics is. When we started doing this work, when Kelli and I started doing this work, which was really now 20 years ago, a long time, when I would, meet with people, even in the prisoner rights community, the legislative world, and I would start talking about eugenics, it was clear people didn't even know what that word was. And several times people actually stopped me and said, wait, it doesn't seem like a perfect environment. I'm like, no, not utopic, eugenic. Like they literally didn't know what that was, that there was a whole history of trying to design a master race in this country, which fed into many other countries, including Nazi Germany's desire to create an Aryan race, and that's one of the reasons it's perpetuated. And we're seeing it bubbling up in so many ways. Certainly with COVID, we're seeing the demand to sacrifice medically vulnerable people and elders to further the economy. And it pops up all the time with lack of access to healthcare for the most vulnerable people. And what I started thinking about at least 10 years ago now is how what this really is about is it's bubbling up in such a massive way, is about rising fascism. And it's no mistake that we're seeing the rise of white nationalism at the same time that we're starting to see more and more and more eugenic pronunciations on a public scale.
Kelli, I don't know if you want to add to that or not.
Yes, it's hard to follow Cynthia because she is so powerful and knowledgeable. But it goes back to, like, the way I look at sterilization is also the way I look at incarceration. Is who you seem to be unfit, right? Who do you label as a burden to the economy? Who is a public nuisance? So the guy that's hanging on the corner, or maybe drinking or causing some mischief, right, is looked at as the same, is really looked at by society and by, like you said, white supremacies and those that are empowered, the same as somebody who is disabled and trying to cross the street. It's the way, like you said, you're wanting to have this perfect society, this perfect race, and it's just who is deemed fit, who is deemed fit to engage in that society, who is deemed fit to reproduce for that society. And it's the same as what Cynthia said.
Can I add that this is a really important, yes. This is such an important moment for this issue around both disability rights and the threat of sterilization, forcible sterilization of people with disabilities, as well as people in prison. I mean, there is an assault right now on the right to abortion access. And one of the primary ways that the radical right is trying to whittle away at reproductive rights in general is to start with whittling it away with vulnerable people like Kelli, Kristen, people like you with disabilities, right? And it's no mistake, it's strategic. It's designed to be able to open up the door to whittle away reproductive rights. And the rhetoric around that and the campaign around that is also why we see such horrible comments coming out, right? Where the media is sort of feeding building a frenzy around this issue to try to render acceptable the destruction of reproductive rights for broader and broader populations.
Well, to go off of that, of course, documentaries take a good amount of time, and timing tends to be something that can either be a good or a bad thing. Of course, this is coming out as we're dealing with everything that is 2020, including Black Lives Matter. And your documentary, of course, is mentioning that forced sterilization tends to happen to Black and brown women far more than it does white women. What was it like to realize that you were going to be putting out this documentary kind of at the height of these discussions that we're having now?
Well, I think it's important to note that this film, I like to call it our film. It's been a tremendous collaboration from the very beginning. I'm so lucky to have worked with Cynthia and Kelli for the past 10 years, and Angela and our incredible producing team for many years on this project. And I think all of us, when the pandemic hit, were very interested to see how we would be able to pivot from having an entire impact campaign that was very targeted, towards in-person screenings, in-person events. And, I think all of us probably have a different perspective on this. I mean, we talked as a collective so much about how this film would be timely in this moment. And Angela and I decided to actually move up our broadcast on PBS's Independent Lens to ensure that the film would be accessible in this moment. We chose to have a DIY theatrical and to move forward with our theatrical release instead of waiting for a distributor who might actually hold the film until a later date, because it was very important that the film was accessible in this moment when we are seeing how alive and well eugenics really is. As Cynthia and Kelli have mentioned, we are witnessing systemic racism and population control through policing, through imprisonment, through the immigration detention system, and through lack of access to healthcare during the pandemic. So I'll let others speak about this kind of decision as well.
For me, I'm going to go into I'm sorry, Angela, I'm going to go into a different direction. But to me, I just felt like it was fate, right? It was destined for this moment, because initially we were looking at 2019 as to being the release of the film. And then we were held back for maybe some editing reasons and some other technical reasons. We were held back. But then when COVID-19 hit, Erika, I, Cynthia, and Angela, we were talked about like, oh my goodness, like how is this, like is the message that we're trying to get out, is it going to be overshadowed by the pandemic, right? Like, because we want to make sure that we have people attention. And then the racial and social and civil unrest and racial unrest kind of happened. So then now we dealing with the COVID-19, and then we dealing with George Floyd murder. And so we were like, okay, oh my God, like all of this is going on. But like I told Erika, I told the team, I said, no, this is the perfect time for this discussion, because in this film we're tackling all of these issues at one time. And everything she said, like just how medically, how people of color are not being given the medical care or the accessibility to it like others have. Just so many different things, systemic racism, and how that plays out in the different layers of our systems, in our government, in our society. So I just really felt like it was supposed to be released at this time. And look at the response. I don't believe that we would have gotten. I trust in the film. Don't get me wrong, but I just think that it just hit different platforms in a way that it was needed for this time that we probably wouldn't have reached just if we was releasing theatrically. But the way that our team also, our media team, how they've also been such like dynamic. Just such a dynamic team, how they've gotten to bring in different platforms that we wouldn't have probably even been looking at if it wasn't for this time. So That's what I was saying.
I just want to add one thing. I know a lot of filmmakers are watching this. I know this is like a lot of the audience for this, and words of wisdom, I would just say, around if you are finishing up a film and trying to, think about how to put it out in this world, is it was really for us being focused on who is the audience for this film? What did we make this film for? And I think people can get really mired in festivals and theatrical and kind of things that aren't necessary, that might be why you made the film. But for us, we knew that we really wanted this film to be available to communities to people who need to see it and to organizations who can utilize it. And so that actually made the decision-making process pretty clear, because if that's what you say this is all about, you then can't hold it back for kind of arbitrary status reasons. You have to really put your film on the path that it needs to be on. And that's a hard decision for some people to make, but it's an important decision.
Along the lines of what Angela just said, I think it was important through the whole making of this film that the film team was so incredibly mission driven. As I said earlier, Kelli and I have been working on this for about 20 years. We've kind of grown up with each other. And Erika has been working with us also for, a decade. And honestly, if Erika hadn't been willing to come in and do a really unusual thing of really embedding herself in the movement and in the campaign, I wouldn't have trusted her as an activist, and Kelli can speak about this, but I doubt Kelli would have trusted her as a survivor of this harm. And it was not even just how can we trust Erika as a ally to people in prison and people of color, but also like how can we trust Erika as an ally to this movement when 10 years ago, if you brought up the concept of prison abolition, radical racial justice, you kind of got looked at like you had three heads. And so, I needed to know that I wasn't bringing someone into my organization and exposing people in prison to someone who was going to mock them, make parodies of them, caricatures out of them, but someone who was really going to trust, that we could trust. And that we could build a long-term relationship with. And so, timing has also been essential in this whole process, and I pray for Erika that she never has to endure another 10-year project. But I do think that the fact that it took 10 years was essential to be able to be truly part of our movement, to be able to capture it, and to be able to portray it accurately and truthfully for what we were trying to accomplish and who we were.
Also, like Cynthia said, this has been a 20-year journey for us. And so when I met Erika and I was introduced to her, I was also at a place of feeling somewhat exploited by so much storytelling, right? And which sometimes that can happen with film participants, those who you're capturing, documenting victimizations and stuff, even the families. Like if you look at some of the families, like Breonna Taylor family, they're constantly having to go through this place of storytelling for shock value and different things like that. And you can feel somewhat exploited. And so I was feeling like, look, I'm tired of talking to my story. Why are you here? So why are you here? And Erika was like, well, she put the camera down, she put her, thing down. She said, what do you need? I said, I need a friend right now. I need someone I can talk to right now. Like I just need someone to talk to. And so she said, well, I'm here. But it was that in that moment that I began to trust her, because it wasn't just about her getting her idea or, this project, or trying to persuade me and get me to trust her for a specific thing. At that moment, I recognized that she cared about me as an individual person, as a woman who have gone through so much different layers of trauma. And so she did not ask me immediately after that. It still took a few months after that to where she then presented the idea again. As I was pulled back to testify, but I respected her on that level. She continued to do what she did with Justice Now, but it made me respect her on a whole different level, that I then began to open up to her and was willing to get behind her camera.
Well, I know, Cynthia, you say at the end of the documentary that this is indicative of a larger problem, and the documentary touches on sexual assault in the prison system. You know, with COVID, we've seen how the prison system has been reacting to a lot of different things, but do we know if there's any update on the medical community with COVID and incarceration? Have things gotten better in any sense?
No. So no, I mean,
Not what I figured.
yeah, I mean, there is a way to provide better health care and a level of compassion and respect to people in prison around their health needs, and that is to let people out of prison and start rendering prisons obsolete. Prisons are, throughout their entire history, have been the subject of efforts to reduce the horrific abuses and violence within them. There's never been a safe, compassionate prison. And so, you know, it's not been surprising that the COVID rates in jails and prisons nationally are spectacularly terrible. I mean, even in the San Francisco Bay Area, so in Northern California where I am, it's one of the metropolitan areas with the lowest COVID rate in the entire country. But our jails and our prisons are crisis points. And we're even sort of fudging the data and not counting those exposures within our county data. So it's, you know, we are still forgetting that population exists and still failing to treat people in prison as human beings. And that is fundamentally an extension of slavery too, right? We're systematically exposing people of color, vulnerable communities to an environment where we control whether or not they live or die. You know, COVID is sort of magnifying, putting a lens on all this.
Well, I think to that question as well, you know, I know you and Kelli at the end of the documentary are working on the reparations bill. Has there been any update on that, especially with COVID kind of slowing everything down?
So we were really on the precipice of getting a reparations bill passed in California. And our bill actually would not just do reparations for people who were historically sterilized under hysteric eugenics, but also contemporarily in California women's prisons. But it also would have mandated that the state have to notify people that they were sterilized. You know, Kelli and I kind of stumbled across the fact that she was sterilized almost, you know, by accident, right? And there are many people clearly who were sterilized in California either while giving birth or during other abdominal surgeries who have no knowledge whatsoever. So the bill would have done that. With COVID, suddenly the California legislature was wary to spend money on anything, and our bill died. We're still pushing a budget request, and we have high hopes that will pass. We're encouraging everyone who watches the film to go to our film's website, bellyofthebeastfilm.com, and sign the petition demanding reparations as well as notification of survivors in California. And this hopefully will serve as a model that can be replicated across the country to help ensure that these abuses don't continue and resurrect elsewhere. You know, we have never had accountability, and justice requires accountability and behavioral change. And we've never had accountability or acknowledgement of these abuses on a state level, and it keeps resurfacing. So we feel like this reparations push is essential. So again, please go to our website and sign the petition.
Well, the next question I had, you know, the documentary opens with the interview of Kelli during the lawsuit for her sterilization, and we go back to that a couple of times, and you get to see how she is essentially interrogated for her past. Erika, what made you want to open the film with that interview and utilize it in a way to show how we're slowly seeing now how male authority figures tend to ask the wrong questions when they're interviewing victims of domestic violence?
Yeah, this, you know, going back to something that Kelli mentioned earlier, we thought that the film was done at end of 2018. We thought that the film was ready to be released into the world. And I had been speaking with the attorneys who represented Kelli during her trial and about accessing her case file for fact-checking purposes. And the law firm that had taken on Kelli's case had merged with another law firm, and only one of the attorneys on her case actually was still there who had made the merge. And once we got in touch with him, it took months to actually track down the files. And they were in this like random offsite storage facility in the middle of California, in the middle of nowhere. And we were so fortunate that he believed in the film and remained committed to uncovering them. So really, we didn't think that these files would have anything, you know, interesting in them. It was really just for fact-checking purposes. But within the files, once they were finally uncovered, there was a DVD of Kelli's deposition. And upon viewing, we completely restructured the film around it. And the deposition footage really serves as our introduction to imprisonment, and then later placing us in the midst of an unfolding trial. And then finally also as a storytelling device, evoking kind of both past and present as you see Kelli pursuing her own dreams. You know, one of the most, I think, poignant moments in the deposition, you know, there are many poignant moments, but when Kelli asks, "Can I hope?" And am I allowed to hope? And then, you know, carefully describes her hopes and dreams, which she has fully, you know, realized and beyond at this point in her life. So I thought that was a really, really important point. Angela and I worked, you know, really combed through that deposition footage. And I don't know, Angela, if you want to speak about that process too, or Kelli, if you want to add as well.
Well, I just wanted to add that, you know, with friends and family who've seen the film, everybody mentions that moment. And I think it's because you can, for two reasons. One, Kelli's so young in that footage. And so you see how just vulnerable she is in that moment. But also in the film, a lot of people are talking about things that have happened sort of in the past, but it's kind of one of the moments where you are in the present with the person going through an experience. And there's just a different energy to that when you watch it, and you feel it in a different way and you remember it. So, you know, we thought it was really important to have that moment in the film, and we're just really happy that somebody came across that DVD.
What I want to add to that moment when you were talking about just that male presence and how I was interrogated is that in which we talk about this in the work that I do, that most women of color are not seen as victims, period. We're not seen as victims. We're not given the same compassion, whether if it's sexual assault, domestic violence, police brutality, death, whatever. There's some way or another that most women of color are villainized in some way, discredited in some way, to not make what happened to them as impactful as it really is. And that's what you were seeing in that moment for me when I was watching it, when I was getting the opportunity to sit back and watch it. When I seen Belly, I was like, damn, that's really messed up how they were doing me, because I was on trial all over again for while I was in prison. It really had nothing to do with what was happening with me at that moment, but they was trying to discredit me as an individual and make me look a certain way. But that's what happens. And so that's what you were seeing in that moment, which is that the lack of fairness and compassion, and which is the reason why, even though I respect all of what Cynthia does, but I'm at a point now where I do not respect the law. Having gone through a trial, being a domestic violence victim with an iron burn on my chest and an iron burn on my arm, and still being convicted of 25 years to life, and then after being incarcerated for protecting myself and my abuser with my children, then I'm sterilized, and to be placed back on trial again, where that I'm in both situations, I'm trying to defend myself in this court of law. And I realize that the court of law has nothing to do with emotions. It has nothing to do with compassion. It has nothing to do with the human experience. It is based on the ability to present a theory that, you know, on some circumstantial evidence, And really, I have no respect for the law whatsoever anymore, because I realize is that it has nothing to do with what's humanly right, what's morally right. And that's what you were seeing in that moment.
I want to give Kelli the last question that I have. At the end of the film, you talk about trying to find your happy ending, and if you get one. I wanted to ask, with obviously 2020 being a nightmare for everybody, I mean, I'm hoping that you found your happy ending. Did you?
You know what? Actually, yes, my happy ending has shifted. And the reason why it has shifted is because it took the film. It took the making of this film and for me to see the journey, to see myself. I've been so caught up in surviving, in crisis moment, overcoming trauma, trying to heal, that I didn't recognize how far I had come. And so now when I look on the screen, I see a family. I don't see subjects, I don't see producers or directors, I see a family. That's a happy ending. On it, I saw that I was able to walk the stage and I had surrounded by other family members. That's a happy ending. When I heard myself say that I hope to work with battered women, I've personally worked with thousands of women, like literally thousands of women throughout this 10-year of my career. That's a happy ending. And so I am blessed. It did not, prison did not do to me what it was designed to do. It it might have, broken me for a moment, but it didn't shatter me. And I, in that, I was rebirthed in a place, in a very, very dark place. The title "Belly of the Beast" is, it has so many different meanings to it. Because of course, belly of the beast, meaning that in the heart, in the core, in the nucleus, in the center of something that is so, horrific and heinous and stuff. But it's also a place where, if you look at it biblically, where Jonah was sentenced when he was running from something, and then he found his purpose and he accepted his purpose before he was let back out as well. And so there's so many different metaphors that you can get with just the title. But for me, and it also be the belly of the beast of how people see us as ugly being, but at the same time, what we have in our belly, being able to reproduce and everything is like that. But I was really truly rebirthed. And this film, it gives me a legacy, in which I don't believe that it would have came in such a way had not I been entrusted. I'm gonna say this one last thing, Kristen, and I'm gonna hand it off to everybody else. I now ask myself, what would have happened if I won my case? Right? Because usually when people win their case, I would have had enough money to start my own life, buy a home for me and my children, maybe finance my own business. I may not have been sold in the fight had I won my case, because I would have been grateful and I would have went on about my life. And that would have been the so-called happy ending. But life and purpose had a bigger meaning, and it was other women. And then as we began to fight and we were so angry and outraged, it made us fight on and look further and investigate further. And for that, we were able to discover that not only did it happen to me, but thousands of other women. And not only that, women of disability, women of mental health issues, and Latino women for over 100 years. So this sterilization thing has been happening for over 100 years. And so because of that, I found purpose out of pain. And so that's what I want to end with.
This documentary made me cry, and Kelly's going to make me cry right now. So, you know, I think that's a good note to end this with. But I want to thank all of you for participating and giving insight into this amazing film. Cynthia, what is the website if people want to sign the petition, find ways to help? I want to make sure that they have all the information to hopefully keep the fight going.
Sure. To get involved, to do screenings, to sign the petition, to think about how your own campaign, if you're with an organization that wants to do work, can use the film, you can go to bellyofthebeastfilm.com and get all that information there. And we really do want people to use this film to make change. I mean, my hope is that this film is so much bigger than just Kelly's story, that it's an inspiration for people to see that if you persevere and work with others and team up, you can make huge change happen. So our hope is that we'll continue to use the film to make that kind of change.
We thank everybody watching, and hopefully you enjoy the film. So thank you so much.